knowledgeable in the industry. I've been in the tobacco industry for 35 years. I retired from RJR, and then I was a consultant for 7 years for wholesalers, manufacturers, retail, and the government on tobacco issues. So I'm very knowledge-based on that piece of it. This category has been very rapidly changing, and so I'm knowledgeable, but I'm no means the expert that has the answer for every single question. So depending on where your question is at, I'll probably have an answer for it, but if it's something, I'm not going to BS you. So if I don't know it, I'm just going to tell you, you know what, sorry, I don't know the answer to that. I think that way it just keeps the good information solid, and it's not me going off on a tangent with something. We'll get going.
Gotta change it to music.
Yeah, no music. Can do a little soft shoe, a little singing, yeah, something like that. All right, we're gonna get it going here, and like I said, if anyone else comes in afterwards, then they can just kind of fill in. But first of all, just so I got a basic knowledge of where you guys are at, from a vaping community standpoint, how many of you guys currently carry one or more vaporizer product lines? Okay, of the people remaining, how many of you is this like totally new and you're just thinking about it, looking to see is this, you know, a category that's good for my store, or if you just want to get educated? Anyone? Okay, so it looks like, you know, there's a couple people in it, and it's totally understandable, but it looks like that everyone has a broad knowledge, or at least a basic knowledge to begin with, so I'm going to kind of focus on that. Why vaping? I mean, if we sat here at last year's show, no one's talking about vaping hardly. I mean, literally, a couple of retailers might have brought it up. The focus over the last couple of years has been electronic cigarettes. That's been the progression, or the hot item in the OTP category, which all these alternative products fall into. If we turn back the clock, you know, even further, say 10, 15 years ago, the tobacco industry was fairly stagnant. You know, you might get a line extension like a Marlboro Ultralight 72. You know, I mean, they kept doing line extensions, but there was nothing really new. Snus came out then, and it was a bright spot. It had a nice uptick, you know, in the industry. It kind of flattened out after a couple of years. It's still viable, but it doesn't have the growth that it had 10 years ago. Cigarillos then became the hot item. The flavored foil packs and that was the key thing that people were turning. That was the excitement in the category. Then e-cigs came into the picture roughly 5 years ago. My company got into electronic cigarettes in 2009. We were one of the early ones to do it. And that was when that category was just starting to blossom. 4 years ago, the bulk of electronic cigarettes were sold in tobacco stores or in mall specialty shops or online. It took it a while to migrate to convenience gas, small food outlets. Now, generally, 9 out of 10 retailers in the convenience gas or small food outlet carry electronic cigarettes. Okay, so that where the growth curve for a person selling them used to be, you know, have a very high incline on it, now it's leveled off so much, not so much because the category is seeing a decline, but it's because it's been saturated because every retailer sells them. Not only do they sell one, they may have 6 different brands in there. So your piece of that pie is much smaller. The next trend that started coming in was the vaping category. And the vaporizing category is just coming into mainstream retail, convenience gas, small foods within like the last year. This is where electronic cigarettes were 4 years ago, and I just wanted to show that analogy. We anticipate that over the next 12 months, convenience gas will take the bulk of that volume out of those vape lounges. Does everyone raise a hand if you have a vape lounge within a couple of miles of your store? Okay, a fair amount. In certain parts of the country, those are so common and they pop up overnight that they're still selling the bulk of those juices and supplies now. That's all they sell. They sell the liquids, they sell the hardware. And when they sell it, they may have 50 versions of the hardware. And we'll get into how that differentiates between where you want to be and where they are. Okay, another thing. Why are vaporizer products growing? You know, what is pushing the consumer to now ask for them? And why would they ask for them in your stores? Because that's the questions you got to think about. First off, increased flavor options. If you're buying an electronic cigarette, right now you're pretty much limited to traditional tobacco, menthol. Depending on the brand, they may have, you know, like Blue's got a vanilla, there might be a chocolate, but you have very few flavor options. Okay, it's mainly traditional tobacco and menthol. The consumer wants flavor options. Doesn't matter whether it's electronic cigarettes, vaping products, candy bars, vodkas now. You know, when you go to the vodka store, you went to, you know, buy a bottle of vodka 10 years ago, you just had brands. You know, now you've got a brand, but you've got, you know, peppermint, you've got lime, you've got, you've got 30 flavors of vodkas because the consumer wants flavor options. Flavor options take a bad rap in the media because they keep saying, oh, you're doing flavors to drive it towards kids. That's totally false. The bulk of flavored products are bought by adults, purchased by adults. Like I said, vodkas, you know, any type of beer, wine. You know, wine is, you know, can be a traditional Merlot or a Cab or whatever, or you have certain things that are more sweeter, you know, the old, my generation, the Boone's Farms, you know, things like that. They're still, you know, good sellers. They want flavor options. Next thing is the ability to custom blend flavors. With liquids and vaporizers, people mix. So like for instance, in mine currently, I have a blend of cherry and chocolate. Because the liquids can mix interchangeably, you have an unlimited number of options that you can do as a consumer. And consumer likes that because it's something different. They can have a variation of flavor profiles versus always smoking traditional tobacco or menthol. Some consumers want just that. They want, you know, hey, listen, I'm not in it for the flavors. I'm a menthol smoker. That's what I want. They have the option to do that, but the people that want a little bit more of a variation, they can do that. Nicotine strength options is another thing. Traditional e-cigarettes, you've got a very limited number of nicotine options. Generally, you'll have a high, a mid, a low, and in some brands a zero. Okay? Some brands only have 1 or 2 nicotine strengths. So now, if I'm a Marlboro Red smoker and I'm going to an electronic cigarette and all they have is a light blend, say an 11 milligram strength, I'm not going to be satisfied because my body is used to a higher nicotine consumption rate, and I'm going to be smoking twice as much because I still need that same amount of nicotine, otherwise I'm going to be having the cravings. With electronic cigarettes, you're limited. As you get into the vaporizing juices, you have a plethora of nicotine options. Generally, you have a high and a mid. Okay, some brands only have 1 option, but for instance with us, we also have a 0. And a 0 is still the smallest category, but it's the fastest growing category. And the reason is I can dilute down my 12s or my 24s. So now I have an unlimited number of nicotine options. I can take my 12, put a little bit of 0 in it, the same exact flavor profile, and I can dilute it down theoretically to a 10 or an 8 or a 6. So if I'm doing a nicotine reduction therapy in my mind, I have the ability to do that. With traditional e-cigarettes or tobacco products, it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to do. If you're in a cessation mindset, if you're doing gum or patches or something, once again, you have very set options available to you. With vape juices, it's unlimited. So that's another reason why this explosion of growth. The vapor production. If you are a smoker, you know, there's a couple of different things playing in. You have the psychological, just saying, oh, I need a cigarette. I get up every morning and, you know, I have my cup of coffee, I have a cigarette. It's very psychological. You have the physiological, which is the nicotine and the chemical compound in your body. You know, nicotine is a highly addictive drug. And if you are a smoker and you don't have the nicotine, you're going to be uneasy, agitated, you know, just kind of nervous because of your body telling you you need that nicotine. Okay? But then there's also just the habitual piece, the hand to mouth. Okay? To quit smoking or to change your smoking pattern is extremely difficult without looking at all 3 of those pieces. Gum or patch only addresses one piece, the physiological, the nicotine absorption. Okay, an e-cigarette mimics a couple of those. One, you have the nicotine piece, so you're covering the physiological. You're doing the psychological because it looks like a cigarette. You know, so you may convince yourself that you're smoking, even though you're not smoking a traditional cigarette. But plus there's the visual. When I exhale from an e-cig, I've got, you know, a plume of vapor that lasts and then it dissipates rather quickly. The next step of that, yeah.
I have them coming in and they're using the patch and getting a zero.
Yes.
From the juice, and then they use their nicotine patch. And they say that it makes it too strong if they go up too high, but some will go with the nicotine patch and maybe go up to an 8, and others will go to a 0. And that's how they're putting smoke,
Yeah.
that's what they told me. But they have to have that in their hand.
Yeah, because you have to attack all those pieces of it, and that's
Yeah,
exactly
and
what we're
they're
talking
using
about.
both. Yeah.
And the tough part, or the difficult part about that, and what you always, you know, we always caution people about, if you're doing that with a 0, fine. Problem is that some people on the patch, they'll smoke a traditional cigarette while on the patch, or they'll smoke an e-cig that has nicotine or a nicotine product, and now you're lumping on additional levels of nicotine, and we always recommend against that in every form. Okay?
So that's why you can get the patches in different nicotine form too.
Correct.
So that's where they're experimenting to use
Yes.
the juice with it.
Yes. So back to that visual piece we're talking about. With vaporizers, when you exhale, you get a much bigger plume of vapor. Okay? The nicotine intake's the same. Okay? The mimicking of the hand and mouth is the same. The physiological is the same because you're getting the nicotine, but now the visualization piece is more gratifying because you're used to that when you have a cigarette in your hand. You know, a lot of people talk about e-cigs about, a lot of people got into it, tried it, but they didn't stay with it. And almost always the #1 complaint is, I don't feel like I'm smoking because, you know, when I first start that e-cigarette, I get a lot of vapor, but then after hitting it a couple of times, I don't get as much vapor. You know, I gotta draw a little bit harder on it. I don't have that visual cloud. You do get that with vaporizers, and so that's one more reason for the popularity. Another reason is customized hardware options. When we talk about vaporizers, there's two pieces. There's the consumable, which would be the bottle of the liquid, and then there's the hardware, which is the actual vaporizer or pen that a lot of people call it. There are so many options where if everyone in this room had a different vaporizer in their hand, you still wouldn't even touch 1/10 of the options that are out there. There are things from the ultra cheap, ultra low end, to some that really look like they're a clarinet or something. I mean, I've seen some of them that look like, you know, you should be in a Mideast den somewhere doing it because, I mean, these things are huge. They have options. You have twist voltage regulators. You have multiple battery, stacking batteries in it. There's just an unlimited number of options. As a smoker or a vapor, if you're into that, you can get that. If you don't want to have all those options, if you want to stay basic, you can do that as well. So once again, you have more options or more control as a consumer. Juices. All juices are compatible with all vaporizers. Anyone tells you any different from that, they're wrong. They just want you to say, oh, if you use a different juice in my vaporizer, it voids the warranty. That's just because they want to sell you the juice. Juice it's a very standardized composition. They all work with with a different hardware option. The only time it ever comes into play that it's any different is some of the extremely high-end vaporizers may require a lighter blend or a thinner grade of juice or a thicker grade of juice than what you would traditionally find. So unless you're using an extremely expensive vaporizer hardware piece, the juice is going to be compatible whether it's my brand or somebody else's. Okay? Savings. Most people are either Missouri or Illinois, correct? Do we have anyone else that's out? Okay. Missouri, we know it as the great land of cheap cigarettes. Lowest excise tobacco tax in the country. I'm outside of Chicago. We have over $7.50 of tax per pack of cigarettes versus you guys have 17 cents. I think it's still 17, isn't it? Yeah. That doesn't change the product. The consumer gets no benefit. It's just taxing. One pack of cigarettes, even down in this area, if you're in the Illinois, you're probably on a traditional pack of Marlboro. You're spending anywhere from $6.50 in Missouri. You're probably more in that $4.50 range. Okay? From a consumer standpoint, a 10 ml bottle, which is the most common size of liquid, is the equivalent of roughly 6 packs of cigarettes. Okay? When you look at the price range on a bottle of juice, on the ultra low end, they average, they go as low as $3.99. I see some juices that are over $25 per bottle. Okay? But it's the equivalent of roughly 6 packs of cigarettes. So if you do the math as a consumer, I'm buying a bottle of juice, say an average price range of $6. I'm getting 6 packs worth of cigarettes. I'm spending $1 a pack versus $4.50 to $6 of a traditional cigarette. Okay, so there's a huge cost savings for the consumer. When you buy your hardware to start out with, yeah, your first time you're going to spend a little bit more, or it's probably going to be about a wash. If you buy a kit, a hardware kit, and a bottle of juice, it's probably going to be about the same as what you would have paid for those 6 packs of cigarettes. But after that, you get a much more economical way of ingesting nicotine. And it all comes down to ingesting nicotine for the most part in the category. Tax savings. As we stand today, there's only one area in the country that has an excise tax on vaporizer products, and that's Minnesota. There's a couple of other people that are looking at it, a couple of other things where it's gotten through the House, not through the Senate, but as we stand today, there is no excise tax for any of the markets that most of you would be in, I believe. So once again, we talked about those taxes. When you take that out of the equation, it just adds to that economic savings to the consumer. The last thing about it is, and we're on electronic cigarettes, a lot of people liked them because they looked like a cigarette. Blue outstanding, but the rest of them looked like a traditional cigarette. The vaping community likes it because they don't look like a cigarette. So depending on where you're at, I know there's some local laws here that you're not supposed to be smoking or vaping in any area you're not smoking, but in most parts of the country, you can still vape just about anywhere. Okay, but people look at it, there's no way if I'm hitting this that you think I'm smoking a cigarette. Okay, so the vapors like that because it differentiates them from a traditional smoker. That's kind of like the background of the industry, how we got here, and how they work. Does anyone have a question on that piece? Because then otherwise I'm going to move real quick into the next one. Okay, the biggest thing then is, what do I look for when I'm starting out, when I'm adding a brand to my store? First and foremost, okay, there's 3 types of juices available from a manufacturing standpoint. There's those that are made in China, okay? There's those that are what we call backroom manufactured, and then there's those that are made in the USA, and to some extent there's some that are blended in the USA. Okay, the difference of those is, in China, most of the low-end juices come from China. There are no manufacturing processes required for those. There is no testing required, there's no concentration levels required, there's no production checks in place. With that, you can get those products a lot cheaper because a lot of those processes cost money to do. That's the first thing you want to traditionally avoid from a juice standpoint. Hardware is almost all made in China. I don't care what brand it is, 99% of it's made in China. They are masters at that. That's why our iPhones are made there, our laptops are made there, all the electronic things are made there. The hardware they do well. The juices, not so much. The second thing is backroom manufacturers. If you have vape lounges near you, chances are, if they are not buying the juice from China, they're mixing it in the back room. To make the analogy real simple, it's like you sitting in your kitchen at home and making a recipe. I'm adding a little bit of liquid nicotine, a little bit of flavor, a little of glycol, or stirring it up, squeezing it into bottles, and that's what you're buying. That's almost scarier than the China stuff. Just because now you've got a whole bunch of people, at least in China, they're making a lot of it, so they know the process. It's not controlled, but they know the process. The backroom manufacturers, it's even more so out there. The third one is the made in the USA. Okay, there's 2 forms of it. There's traditional made in the USA start to finish. My brand is made in the USA start to finish. The second part is blended or bottled in the USA. What they do is they'll take the liquid nicotine concentrate, they'll actually blend it or source it in the States, they ship it overseas, where then it is broken down, diluted with propylene glycol or vegetable glycerin, and then flavored, bottled, and shipped back. Whenever it leaves the soil from the States to go anywhere, the control piece is lost. Not that something is going to happen or whatever, it's just you can't control or minimize the risk of it. What I tell everyone is look for USA made start to finish brands, okay? With the manufacturing thing is not only where it's made, but how it's made. is the production site controlled or licensed by a government manufacturing facility? The FDA does not license a brand or a tobacco product of any kind. They don't authorize it or approve it. No such designation exists. However, they will license and control your manufacturing facility if you follow certain protocols. You know, you have to, there's a lot of tracking, the cleanliness, batch testing, all of those things. You're going to want to look for that when you're choosing a brand. The ingredients. All liquid nicotine should be pharmaceutical grade. Unfortunately, it's not. Okay, there's several types. There's natural nicotine, there's artificial nicotine. The nicotine that is in the gums and the patches is pharmaceutical grade. You should look for pharmaceutical grade nicotine in your e-liquid as well. The ingredients outside of the liquid nicotine. There's propylene glycol, or a PG, some people hear from, or a VG, which is the vegetable base of it. You want to make sure that that is a natural product and not a manipulated product. The glycerin piece of it is manipulated to begin with, but the process it's a little bit different, okay? So you just want to make sure that it's good ingredients going into it. The flavorings can be artificial or can be natural. The coloring or scents, a lot of people add different things to make it more appealing. Once again, you should look for natural versus artificial. If it doesn't add anything to the product, why put it in? The coloring, like you look at a cherry, some bottles are really red, it's artificial coloring. It doesn't add anything to the product, why put it in? Okay, the scent, the flavor itself, if it's a natural flavor, it should have the natural flavor scent with it. You shouldn't have to add an extra ingredient to make it smell a certain way. Okay, so those are things to look for. Lot identification, if it is in a FDA licensed facility, every bottle will be labeled with an identification code on the bottom that can identify where the core ingredients came from, what batch it came from. Should there ever need to be a recall of any kind, you can identify every bottle. It's just the same if you look at your candy bars, any drug, aspirin, anything like that, it will always have lot identification numbers on it. Your liquid nicotine or your juice should have those same markings. If not, you might want to stay clear of it. Reputable manufacturer. Like I said, I mean, there's a lot of options out there. I would stick with something that you know has been around and is going to be around, something that has been in the industry, because a lot of people are entering this category because they see a real quick profit motive. And these are guys that are manufacturing, trunk slamming it, driving around from store to store. Hey, I've got juices here, I can give it to you for whatever price. You want to stay clear of it, because to do everything correctly costs money. And it's not that much difference in cost than the ones that aren't done. Liability insurance, a key thing. Ask every manufacturer, are you insured? If so, how much? If they don't have specific answers, they're lying. Liability insurance is extremely expensive. But here's the thing, as a retailer, should something happen and a lawsuit's filed, you're going to be named in that lawsuit. A.E. Weiss is going to be named in that lawsuit. If it's my product, I'm going to be named in that lawsuit. If I don't have liability insurance as a manufacturer, guess what? You're on the hook. Why take that liability? Liability insurance is extremely expensive, but we do it because we feel there's value and confidence to the consumer knowing that we have it. So liability insurance is another key thing. Merchandising support, do they have display options? Do they have point of sale options? Are they helping you sell their product? And then finally, product offering. Did they come in as just an e-juice manufacturer? If so, guess what? They're probably trying to jump in. Once the FDA does regulate the category, they may be here, they may not. If it's a product from a company that's been around and has other things, other tobacco products as well, they're not going to disappear overnight. So you want to look at someone who's been in the industry, they understand what you're looking for as a retailer, but also what the consumer is. From an industry's perspective, that's the bulk of it. Does anyone have any questions on how they operate? Or, I mean, because I could do an eight-hour seminar on this, but I want to stick to your questions. Any questions about hardware, how they operate, lengths, how long does a battery last, what's the difference in batteries, the difference in price points. As convenient, let's talk about that hardware piece real quick. From a convenience gas or a small food operator, you want 1, 2, 3 vaporizer options max. Because otherwise what's going to happen is a consumer is going to come in and talk to your cashier and say, okay, well, what's the difference between that one and that one? Most often the retailer or the cashier is going to go, that one's $30 and that one's $28. Beyond that, I have no idea. They're not experts in the hardware. It changes too quickly to be an expert. The second thing is you're in the business of convenience, getting people in and out quick. You got two guys, trying to get authorized on pump 6. Another one's trying to get a pack of cigarettes, a candy bar. You don't have time to sit and have a big discussion with those consumers. They're better off if they have those questions, let them go to a vape shop where they have 100 options, or they're probably going to buy that product online, those big vaporizers. It's not the customer that's going into convenience gas or a small food. Traditional tobacco stores can get away with a little bit more variety because they have the time to have that discussion with the consumer. Okay, but at the same time, they don't want to have 100 options. They may have 15 or 20, starting at a low price point and ending at a high price point. Any questions?
All your juices are pretty much FDA friendly, right? They're not going to go after your juices as far as, you've got gummy bear out there, you've got bubble down, you're just making like flavors, like fruit flavors in the back.
Correct. When I talk about Just Juice, which is my brand, all of our flavors are straight flavor. It's strawberry, it's grape, it's menthol, it's traditional tobacco. We don't have cotton candy, gummy bear, all of those types of things, because we anticipate there is going to be regulation from the FDA, and we've been working with them. We want to make sure that even though we're offering flavor options, we're not targeting it. Most adults don't go after a gummy bear flavor. Okay, some do, but most don't. As an industry, we're all pretty much on the same page as this is an age-restricted product. Even if the law doesn't say it is in your state, we don't want kids buying it. We don't market it to kids. That whole thing about it's big tobacco coming in, I got to tell you, there's not one big tobacco company in the vapor category. So that's, everyone tells me, oh, it's big tobacco on the e-cigs. I guess, I love the fact you're calling me big tobacco, but really, I don't have sales of 17 billion a year or 5 billion a year. It's not there. So that's just a media hype, but we're very concerned about that argument that comes up on flavors. So we do try to keep it very basic. When and if the FDA does release the regulations, nobody knows what they're going to be. We think we have a pretty good idea because we're involved in the process, but they can always throw a wild card in there. We anticipate some of the first things they're going to go after is that age restriction, and we hope that they do that. We hope they make a federal age on vaping products, including e-cigarettes and vaporizers. 2, they will probably go after the flavor profile and say, you can't do the cotton candy gummy bear. Stick to grape, cherry, whatever the case may be. 3, cartoon characters. That keeps coming up. Not many of us, the legitimate companies don't do that already. So, we think they will probably say you can't to make it in line with regular tobacco laws. Okay. Manufacturing processes, another thing they're going to go after. We think they will crack down because if you're buying a bottle that's labeled as 24 milligram strength, it better be 24 in there and not 28 or 17. It's just that what you're buying and what it's advertised as is what it actually is. How it's manufactured, batch testing, all of those things, we think those will be part of it. Just Juice, we've already implemented every one of those pieces that we anticipate so that when the law comes down, we can be in compliance very quickly. The only other piece with that we don't know about, and we're kind of waiting to see, is the packaging, because I'm sure that there'll probably come some sort of a child-proof type cap, but the reason there's so many options, they're not going to come in and say, just put a cap on it. They're going to have a very specific type of cap. And so a lot of us are waiting to see what that's going to be because we don't want to come out with one version and then the FDA comes out a month from now and says it has to be this version, and we got to spend another $100,000 to retool our manufacturing site to make that. So as soon as they announce that, whatever it is, we will be in compliance with that as well. Anything else? Yeah.
On excise taxes, have you heard of any legislation between Missouri and Illinois that's already reached either committees in your state?
Not in Missouri and Illinois that has gotten any real traction yet. There's a couple of suburbs in northern Illinois and the Chicago market that have passed some local stuff. The problem is they have no idea how to even implement it. It's nice to say, oh, we're going to tax it at this rate.
how do we get the?
But how do we do it? It's not a cigarette pack where you got a tax stamp and it comes through the wholesaler and it's a whole different ballgame. So even the ones that have said, yeah, we are gonna do it, it's gonna be a year minimum before it ever goes into play because they don't have a clue how to start it. It's a different process. From a restriction standpoint, I guarantee you, in Missouri and Illinois, there's probably minimum 20 or 30 bills pending, mostly in a local city council or a county, what you can or can't do with it. You know, that's why we want some federal oversight, because that will eliminate a lot of those local things. You know, the big one in Illinois, a lot of people saying, oh, this town, whatever, Northbrook just passed. You gotta be 19 to buy it. Well, that's great, but all of Northbrook's in Illinois, and the law in Illinois is you have to be 19 to buy it. So that's like us coming out and saying, oh, in Northbrook, you gotta be 21 to buy alcohol. Well, yeah, duh. You know, but they're still doing laws like that because it gets them a good publicity thing. You know, oh no, we don't want them selling to kids. Well, we don't want them selling to kids either, and in Illinois you can't. Yeah.
How would they tax this, based on nicotine levels? I mean, what's the average nicotine in a cigarette?
Depending on the brand, you know, I mean, because you have ultralights, you've got something like a Capri that's a very low nicotine. You know, when you go all the way up into like a Camel or Chesterfield, it's just too wide of a spectrum. I couldn't give you the exact numbers because I really don't know.
But
But
you do about zero nicotine. If you have liquid, there's no nicotine.
correct. Minnesota, the one that has it, it's based on a percentage of wholesale list. So it's strictly a math equation. It's 95% of the cost of the product is the state excise tax. They do it, if it has nicotine in it. So zeros would not be taxed, the hardware would not be taxed, but if you have nicotine in it, and it doesn't matter how much nicotine. The 24 milligram isn't taxed at twice the rate of the 12, because they haven't figured out a way to do that either. So that's what I'm saying. There's not a real easy way of doing it, but generally it's either a per unit, in other words, per milliliter, or a percentage of the cost of the product. Yeah.
So what's the cost difference that we're paying for the juice here in Illinois and Missouri as opposed to what people would be paying for it in Minnesota with their
It's
excise
huge.
structure?
To give you an idea, and like I said, everyone's got a little bit different costs, so I can't give you exact numbers because
Well, yeah.
everyone prices it. On a typical e-cigarette, and the tax is the same for e-cigarettes as it is on vaping products. Okay, for like my brand, Sig Electric, okay, in this market, wholesale, you are generally somewhere in the area of $6.50 to $7 per stick. Okay, in Minnesota, that same item is about $3 more. So it's almost a 50% of the net end. From a juice perspective, like here, we're generally right around, I think Weiss is like $2.38 or $2.39 a bottle on my products. In Minnesota, it's about $4.10 for that same exact product, and the rest is all tax.
Just don't go to Minnesota. to buy
Yeah,
it.
and by the way, in Minnesota, because it is so clustered, that in Minnesota, most wholesalers wouldn't even ship into the state because it's a paperwork nightmare. So what we had to do for our products was, we are licensed by the state of Minnesota and we supply our stores direct in that state. Because the wholesalers are just like, you know, we can't, it's just too complicated, it's not worth the effort. We hope that never happens because we don't want to do that. That's the great services that our distributor partners perform, they do better than we do. So we don't want to have to get in that game, but we have to because of that tax. Yeah, question?
We were talking at an earlier seminar here about the non-smokers that have gotten into this. Do you have any stats? I know they didn't really have any on
Are you referring to like the gateway thing we hear about people starting?
starting.
Okay. Where this first came out was one of the studies that was done about a year ago. Smoke-Free Kids, the American Pediatric Society were big supporters of this thing. They did a study with high school age people. And I think there was another one that was done with junior high. And the whole thing was, are these types of products gateways to traditional tobacco? When they measured, the different way of doing those studies scientifically, the variables is what you try to control. What they didn't say in a lot of those studies is how that information was gathered, and that the people, they said the use of e-cigarettes doubled amongst high school users over a period of 1 year. But what they didn't tell you is the fact that those people that were doing those surveys were already mostly smokers to begin with. And just like in the adult community, think of the growth curve on e-cigs, the same thing went for, underage minors that were smoking. And so they made it to be this huge gateway thing that they figured out. Is there some people that might start out with a 0 and work their way up? Absolutely, that possibility exists, because it exists. You know, is it common? No. From any research that we find out, study, it's people that are already smokers. If you're a non-smoker, it doesn't, you know, you may try just so I tried it, you know, to see it, but you're not, okay, now I want something with some kick now, I'm gonna go up to nicotine. Okay, and the whole advertising piece that was brought into that saying, you know, well, kids see this, they wanna start smoking. I tell you, I drive by a Scotch billboard every day on my way to my office. I have no desire to drink any Scotch. It just doesn't, you know, excite me. So it's the same analogy. Is there going to be a person in the universe that did? Yeah, there is, unfortunately. But the commonality of it is extremely small. Generally, the people that are using these products are smokers to begin with. Any other questions? I would like to invite you all to my booth, 26. I also have some brochures up here on Just Juice products. Real quickly too, on the vaporizer, I didn't touch on this. There are 2 types. There's liquid only, which is what my Just Juice is and what most vape pens are. But there's also multifunction vaporizers, which can have the chambers trade out, so you can smoke. Herbal would be like you roll your own tobacco, lavender, things like that. You can also do other forms of concentrates, or depending on what state you live in, other things. That's a differentiation, but the technology is the same. Otherwise, thank you. If you have any questions, stop by booth 26. I'm more than happy to help you out. And I hope we can do some business together.